Molly Ivins, where did you get the title, You Gotta Dance With Them, What Brung You?
It's one of the oldest sayings in politics. You got to dance with them what brung you. And what it means is that when you get to office, when you get to public office, you vote with the folks who put you there. And that used to mean your constituents, the people who voted for you. But more and more what it means is you vote with the special interests who put up the money to get you to public office. And part of what this book is about is the corruption of the American political system by money. It's not as though American politics had ever been pristine and pure. Of course not. Money has always been there. But money nowadays is the dominant factor by such an enormous margin that I think it is making not just a quantitative, but a qualitative difference in American politics.
Let me ask you about this cover right here. I want to know what you went through to get that picture right there.
Well, it's a pickup truck. It's just a picture of me in a pickup truck.
Is it? Are you actually sitting in a pickup truck?
Sure.
Where'd you take it?
Down in Austin, Texas, right near where I live. I drive a pickup truck myself, but that is not my pickup truck. That's an old one.
Why did they want you in a pickup truck for the cover?
They love some kind of Texas connection. They always like to put something up on the cover that reminds people that I'm a Texan.
What does it mean to be a Texan?
Well, good Lord, there's a question. I think my own feeling is that Texans are just like everybody else, only more so. That there is a slight quality of exaggeration, a slightly larger-than-life, pie-eyed quality about the whole state that makes it a lot of fun.
And what is it about Lubbock that you like to write about?
I love to tease Lubbock.
Where is it?
It's out in West Texas, and it's just as flat as a pancake, and I must say, to the uninitiated eye, it does not appear to be one of the world's more attractive cities, but that's because you don't know the people there. They are just as straightforward and open-hearted and good as they can be.
You write in your column, and this is a series of, well, I counted 70 columns?
I believe that's right.
You write in your column about Lubbock in my rearview mirror perished the thought. For instance, one of the local television stations just ran a 3-part investigative series on pantyhose called Born to Run. Is that true?
Of course it's true. You can't make up stuff like that, and you never need to make up anything in Texas because bizarre and strange things just always happen as a matter of course.
And what's the difference between West Texas and East Texas?
East Texas is the very southern part of the state. In fact, I sometimes think that East Texas is more like the Old South than the Old South is anymore. About 50% of the population there is black. It was plantation, cotton farming part of the state. But West Texas is a totally different kettle of fish. It's the dry, ranching part of the state. There are a fair number of Hispanics out in West Texas, and in South Texas now they're the majority. But the western part of the state looks more like what you would think of Texas in a cowboy movie.
I got to read you what you quoted a minister saying to some Texas senators. This is, was this a prayer that you had in one
prayer
column?
opening of every day in the session. We have prayer, and we need it.
And you call it, by the way, what do you call this Texas legislature? You always have a little...
The ledge.
The ledge.
The ledge. It gets too long to write legislature every time you need to talk about what they've been up to.
Did you invent that little...
Actually, a lot of people around the ledge call it the ledge.
The minister said, Father, I pray for these men and women. You know how much they need it. They are facing problems that are much too immense for them to handle alone. They are not smart enough, nor do they have the capacity. I ask you, would you do miracles for them? Why did you use that?
It just seemed to me a perfectly wonderful prayer. If there were ever words to be addressed to the Lord over the Texas legislature, that fella got it just about right. We need miracles, Lord.
Bob Bullock.
Bob Bullock, the national politician of Texas. He is a piece of work.
Who is he?
He is the lieutenant governor of the state of Texas. He's been around since God was a pup. He was, before he was light gov, he was state comptroller. And under our Constitution, like most southern states, we have a weak governor system, so that the lieutenant governor is the guy who really has the clout. And Bob Bullock is one of the smartest, shrewdest, toughest, and sometimes meanest politicians I have ever known. He's a remarkable piece of work.
What's the story about you have a couple of what you call drinking stories in there. Is that
Yeah, he's been sober for quite some time. He went to whiskey school out in California many years ago. But before that, he was a roarer, and he drank just an enormous amount, and as people who drink a lot do, he would not infrequently get himself into trouble. And one time, one of his early wives, he used to get married a lot too, kicked him out of the house, we assumed for good cause, and he went over to stay with a friend of his. But his friend was in turn out drinking. Bob couldn't get into that apartment, but he spotted his friend's car in the alley behind the apartment. So he opened the back door and crawled into the back seat and fell asleep in the back seat of the car. He woke up the next morning, and the car was being driven down the highway by a total stranger. It was not his friend's car at all, and there was Bob in the back seat thinking about how to handle this, and finally he just sat bolt upright and said into the driver's ear, "Hi there, I'm Bob Bullock, your Secretary of State." Poor man almost drove off the road.
Is that a true story?
That's a true story.
He's still Lieutenant Governor?
He's still Lieutenant Governor.
You say that he's off the record as politically incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the whole business, first of all, politically incorrect?
I think it's much ado about nothing. The idea that somehow this is some kind of police come down upon you if you use words that are offensive, I think is nonsense. It seems to me that political correctness is maybe just an attempt to codify good manners or kindness. You don't go around using words that offend people if you have any sense at all. On the other hand, to prissy up language seems to me always a mistake. I like language that's strong and earthy and vigorous and salty. I like to use the full range of the English language.
You said that Bullock calls feminists, quote, them hairy-legged women.
Hairy-legged women, them hairy-legged women. He does that all the time, to annoy us, of course.
but you say he's also good on women's issues.
He is.
So do people excuse people when they're on the right side?
In Texas, I think of necessity, we have a larger tolerance for politicians who are not politically correct. I mean, we could wait a long darn time before we found one who always spoke as we wanted.
There's some words I want you to define.
All right.
Whumper-jawed.
Whumper-jawed. That just left him whumper-jawed. That means with his mouth not only open, staring in amazement, but so amazed he kind of went funny. Like you can say of a suitcase, when you mess up the lid to the body of the suitcase, that your suitcase is whumper-jawed. It means just astonished. Left him whumper-jawed.
Did you invent that word?
His mouth hanging open. No, well, it's an old Texas word.
Slime balls.
Slime balls, well, it seems to me that is a word in great general use. And a useful word it is because there are many of them hanging around. People with no ethics, no integrity, just total slime balls.
Good on ya.
Good on ya. That's another old Texas expression. Good on you, you can even say it. It's approbation. It's encouragement. You're doing right.
You wrote a column about Ann Richards, said good on you.
Good on you, Annie.
Why?
Yeah. Well, she was had been defeated at that point. She lost the governorship to George W. Bush, and I wrote a column about the 4 years she was in office, and it's my judgment that Ann Richards was an awfully good governor. And so I think I closed that column by saying good on you.
What makes you a good governor?
Well, as I say, in our state we have the weak governor system, so that really not a great deal is required of the governor. Not necessarily know much or do much, and we've had a lot of governors who did neither. Ann, I think, was one of our more effective governors, although in the odd way of American politics, I'm not sure I could point to a whole lot that she actually got done. It was mostly a matter of keeping bad things from happening. One of the main reasons she lost the governorship was because she vetoed the concealed handgun bill. And we've got a bunch of gun nuts in Texas who are bound and determined that they should be able to march around with concealed weapons.
What's a gun nut?
Somebody who loves guns. Loves guns. Think that that's just the most important thing in the whole world.
Do you ever know one?
Know lots of them.
And what do they like?
They're people who are crazy about guns. I have never I don't hunt myself, but I sure do know a lot of people who do, and I've never thought, especially in a state like Texas where there's an awful lot of outdoors, that it's ridiculous to try and take away long guns. But I've never seen any use in a society that is, what are we now, at least 70% urban. What is the point of a handgun? What is the point of letting people have handguns? It's just endless tragedy after endless tragedy because of these things. They're little machines designed to do nothing but kill people. And the amount of people in this, number of people in this country who get liquored up or have no sense to begin with, get furiously angry and go and kill one another, I just think it's ridiculous.
You use the word government.
Government.
G-U-M-M-I-T, government.
That's the way Texans say government. That government, you know, we've got to get the government off our backs, got to get the government off our, you know, that's the way people talk. I just write the way people talk. I don't invent this stuff.
What about business? B-I-D-N-E-S-S.
That's exactly the way Texans say the word business. Business.
They all say, all Texans talk that way?
I'm not sure I could say all anymore. We've got a lot of Texans who've moved in from somewhere else, but anyway, almost anyone who's a native will say that, business.
Now what about some bitch?
Some bitch is not a dirty word in Texas. It's not like S-O-B. Some bitch is the Texas word for fella or guy. Well, he's a good old some bitch. And then that some bitch said to me, he said, and there's no offense intended.
Snirk.
Boy, I don't even remember snirk.
Yeah, you call somebody, I'll get it right, snirks. You said they were snirk. I'd never seen that one before. You don't remember that, huh?
Sometimes I do make up words, actually.
Yeah, you said, be still, my heart, the single most transcendent moment of a lifetime covering politics occurred Tuesday night, and you poor snirks in television land missed it.
Luckless fellows, you luckless fellows.
Did you make that word up?
I did make that word up. It just sounds right.
This is another one, nuthatch.
Oh, well, nuthatch is a fine insult, referring to someone being a little bit loosely wrapped, someone being perhaps not having a firm grip on reality. You know, when you write about Texas politics, it is necessary to find words that are highly descriptive.
Garbanzo brains.
Ah, garbanzo brains, right. Bean brains, tiny brains.
What's a garbanzo bean?
It's a bean. It's a bean.
Whoever started using that, because that's I've heard that for years, garbanzo.
I don't know.
How about gazunis?
Gazunis, another word. I can tell you, the need you have for descriptive terms for stupid when you write about Texas politics is practically infinite. Now, I'm not claiming that our state legislature is dumber than the average state legislature, but it tends to be dumb in such an outstanding way. It's, again, that Texas quality of exaggeration and being slightly larger than life. And there are a fair number of people in the Texas legislature of whom it can fairly be said if dumb was dirt, they would cover about an acre. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I agree with an old state senator who always said that if you took all the fools out of the legislature, it would not be a representative body anymore.
You say, and I wrote a bunch of quotes down from your columns, anyone who doesn't make enemies in office isn't worth spit.
That's right. Seems to me if you're going to do something, if you're really going to get something done, you're going to tick somebody off pretty seriously. And I am more and more persuaded that politics itself is the art of finding that thin, tiny sliver of daylight in the huge wall of obstruction that prevents anything from getting done about anything.
Where do you live?
I live in Austin, Texas, the state capital.
How long have you lived there?
Since, let's see, this go-around since about 85, 86. I had lived in Austin earlier. I was co-editor of the Texas Observer back in the 70s.
And were you born there?
No, I'm from East Texas originally.
Where?
I went to high school in Houston, Texas.
How did you get interested in journalism?
Well, I sort of fell into it backwards. When I was coming up, about the only talent I ever showed aside from basketball, which looked like it would be pretty hard to make a living doing that, was for writing. And I loved to read, and my only interest, my big interest in love besides literature was politics. So I sort of fell naturally backwards into journalism. combine writing and politics, and there you are with journalism.
Well, where did the politics come from?
Well, my first political involvement was in the civil rights movement. Well, I came along at a time when, if you were young and idealistic and in the South, that was, you pretty much were drawn to that.
But what got you interested in that? What was the home like?
My family is quite conservative. My father is, I would say, extremely conservative.
Is he alive?
Yes, he is. My mama, bless her heart, passed on. I sometimes think it may have been my mother's fault. My mother tried. She would certainly assure you, without success, to drill good manners into my head. And in some ways, I think that manners are just a formal expression of how you treat people. And in the way black people were treated before the civil rights movement, it was clear to me was very wrong. It was an easy call.
Were they political conservatives, ideological conservatives, your parents?
Yeah, both Republicans, lifelong.
You write a column about your mom. It's the last thing in the book, I think. Yeah. The good mother who put a shoe in the icebox.
My mama was ditzy. There's no question about it. She truly was. She was absent-minded. She was fuzzy about the practical details of life, and of course it made for some hilarious stories, and we loved to tease her.
Well, you write that she was also lazy.
Yep.
A horrible housekeeper.
Horrible housekeeper.
Somewhat depressive. Mm-hmm. And addicted to soap operas, but hey, nobody's perfect.
And my mom.
What do you mean by lazy?
Well, if my mother had her druthers, she would not be up and bustling about doing things. She liked to sit a lot, watch television, eat, talk. She enjoyed people. She was an absolute charmer.
How many of you were there?
3 kids, and my sister is now teaching school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My brother's a lawyer in Bernie, Texas.
You wrote in the book, you said she went on to Smith, Northampton, Massachusetts, where her mother had gone before her, and I went in my turn. And then you have a little parentheses. I know this is so wasp, I'm about to erp myself.
Can you imagine anything more wasp than your grandmother, your mother, and yourself all having gone to the same college?
What about Smith?
Smith? It's a good school.
What'd you learn there? What impact did it have on you?
I really do think I got a good education at Smith. I was not... I'm not one of those people who thinks of my college years as a happy golden time. I mean, I was a Texan who was up in Massachusetts. First of all, I was cold. I mean, I was freezing to death the whole time I was up there. And I found Yankees rather, in some ways, chilly and difficult compared to the Texans I was used to. But I do think I got an awfully good education.
What'd you study?
Grateful for it. History. My major was history.
And how long did you spend with the New York Times as a reporter?
6 years with the New York Times. Some of it in New York, as a political reporter at City Hall in Albany, and then later as bureau chief out in the Rocky Mountains. Would
you take a little time and tell us about reporting on the funeral of Elvis Presley?
Now, there is something that when I'm standing in the checkout line at the grocery store, and if I really need to impress people, I just let fall that I covered Elvis's funeral. And, boy, people just practically draw back with awe. It may yet turn out to be my greatest claim to fame. I was sitting in the New York City Times one day when I noticed a whole knot of editors up around the desk having a great scrum of concern. You could tell. It looked sort of like an anthill that had just been stepped on. And it turned out the New York Times has a large obituary desk, and they prepare obituaries for anybody of prominence who might croak. But it turns out, you may recall, that Elvis Presley died untimely, and they were completely unprepared. Now, this is an enormous news organization. They have rock music critics and classical music critics and opera critics, but they didn't have anybody who knew about Elvis Presley's kind of music. So they're looking across a whole acre of reporters, and you could see them decide, aha, Ivins. She talks funny. She'll know about Mr. Presley. So I wound up writing Elvis's obituary for the New York Times. I had to refer to him throughout as Mr. Presley. It was agonizing. That's the style at the New York Times. Mr. Presley. Give me a break. And the next day they sold more newspapers than they did after John Kennedy was assassinated, so that even the editors of the New York Times, who had not quite, been culturally attuned to Elvis, decided that we should send someone to report on the funeral, and I drew that assignment. What a scene it was.
You say in the book that you got in the cab and you said, "Take me to Graceland." The cabbie peels out of the airport doing 80 and then turns full around to the back seat and drawls, "Ain't it a shame Elvis had to die while the Shriners are in town?"
That's exactly what he said. Shame Elvis had to die while the Shriners are in town, and I kind of raised my eyebrows, and sure enough, I realized what he meant after I'd been there for a while. Because, you know, Shriners in convention, I don't know if you've ever seen a whole lot of Shriners in convention, but they were having a huge national convention that very week in Memphis. And they tend to wear their little red fezzes, and sometimes they drink too much, and they march around the hotel hallways tooting on New Year's Eve horns and riding those funny little tricycles and generally cutting up and having a good time. That's your Shriners in convention, always something very edifying and enjoyable to watch. But every hotel room in Memphis was occupied with celebrating Shriners, and then Elvis dies, and all these tens of thousands of grieving, hysterical Elvis Presley fans descend on the town. So you got a whole bunch of sobbing, hysterical Elvis fans. You got a whole bunch of cavorting Shriners. And on top of that, they were holding a cheerleading camp. And the cheerleading camp, I don't know if you're familiar with the ethos of the cheerleading camp, but the deal is that every school sends its team of cheerleaders to cheerleading camp, and your effort there at the camp is to win the spirit stick, which looks to the uninitiated eye a whole lot like a broom handle painted red, white, and blue, but it is the spirit stick. And should your team win it for 3 days running, you get to keep it, but that has never happened. And the way you earn the spirit stick is you show most spirit. You cheer for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You cheer when the pizza man brings the pizza. You do handsprings end over end down the hallway to the bathroom. I tell you, those young people will show an amount of spirit that would just astonish you in an effort to win that stick. So here I was for an entire week dealing with these 3 groups of people. The young cheerleaders trying to win the spirit stick, the cavorting Shriners, and the grieving, hysterical Elvis fans. And I want to assure you that the New York Times is not the kind of newspaper that will let you write about that kind of rich human comedy.
Why?
Because the New York Times, at least in my day, was a very stuffy, pompous newspaper.
What about today?
A little bit better than it was.
And
It has a tendency, recidivist tendencies, though. You will notice if you read the Times that it lapses into pomposity and stuffiness with some regularity.
why did you leave it?
Well, I actually got into trouble at the New York City Times for describing a community chicken killing out west as a gang pluck. Abe Rosenthal was then the editor of the Times, and he was not amused.
But did they let it go? Did they let it?
Oh, no, it never made it in the paper. Good heavens, no. Such a thing would never get in the Times in my day.
And so what happened?
Oh, I was just sort of put on the S list, we used to call it at the Times. The shit list. What the hell? These people are grown-ups.
And what happened then?
Well, I decided that I didn't have enough time in my life to waste trying to get off the New York Times shit list over a silly thing like that. And I got a call from the Dallas Times Herald, and what they said was, come home and we will give you absolute freedom. You can write whatever you want, about whatever you want to, and you can say whatever you want to. And you know, in the newspaper business, it doesn't get a lot better than that.
Did they ever interfere with you at the Dallas Times Herald?
Almost never. Almost never. And if they changed anything, they would bring it to me, and I would look at it and say, you're absolutely right, let's change that.
You know, I noticed I was reading the chapter on Dumped by Disney, which is about the Fort Worth Star Telegram.
Star Telegram, for which I now work.
And in there you have this quote. You said, trouble is that the news business is rapidly becoming one big plantation. I'm looking over the list of potential bidders the same way they're looking over us, meaning who's going to buy the Fort Worth Star Telegram. By the way, since you've gone there, and how long have you been there?
Since 1990.
How many times has it been sold?
3 times. That's not at all unusual in our business. These giant media corporations keep merging and merging, and you keep getting bought by somebody else and somebody else.
Right below this, you write, Newhouse is on the list. Murray Kempton once observed, I think Cy Newhouse has lost his moral compass since Roy Cohn died. What do you mean by that?
The single meanest line I ever heard said about anybody. Roy Cohn, the late Roy Cohn, was, in my opinion, one of the most despicable human beings who ever lived. He was a ruthless lawyer and a shameless human being, and I know that he has friends still living, but I'm entitled to my opinion too. I think Roy Cohn was one of the most despicable people who ever lived, and he was, in fact, Cy Newhouse's lawyer, the lawyer of this great magnate, this media magnate, Newhouse.
Well, the reason I brought it up is I wanted to ask you, because Cy Newhouse owns the book company that published your book.
That's right.
Did you ever worry about putting that in there, that they might not publish it?
No, I never worry about biting the hand that feeds me. You know, I realize that's an old saying, but I think you're much better off telling the truth. Why would I've never worried about offending the powers that be.
Anybody interfere with you at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram ever?
Same like I'll deal with the Times Herald. We just, if they have a problem, they bring it to me, and I almost always agree that whatever they think needs to be changed, but it rarely happens.
In your book, one of the columns is about Berkeley.
Mm-hmm.
When did you go to Berkeley?
Last year, 1997, I got to teach at the University of California at Berkeley just for 1 quarter, and it was the first time I'd ever really taught, and I loved it.
You call the place a lunatic comedy.
Oh, well, of course I'm going to make fun of it. I mean, Berkeley, California, if you are from Texas, is just hilarious.
Why?
Well, of course, it is just the absolute center of liberalism and political correctness, and it is a veritable hotbed of people of bless their hearts who all think alike in a liberal way. And of course, I'm sometimes called a liberal myself, and you would think I would have felt right at home there, but I just am so used to Texas that I found the culture of Berkeley hysterical.
You're right. Personally, I think living in Berkeley is like dwelling with hobbits.
Mm-hmm.
Any day now, I expect to catch them hiding their furry little feet inside their Birkenstocks. They are so kind and gentle. They all care. They help the homeless. They are proud of their eccentrics. Two of the most notable people in town are the Naked Man and the Pink Man. Yeah. What's that mean? Who are they?
Well, they are local characters there in Berkeley. One guy walks around with no clothes on. He's the Naked Man. And the other guy wears nothing but pink. It is just, he wears nothing but pink, and everybody knows him. There's the Pink Man. It's the kind of community where people like that are rather relished and cherished.
Explain what this means here. I expect to catch them hiding their furry little feet inside their Birkenstocks. What's a Birkenstock?
The hobbits, oh, the Birkenstocks are those famous sandals that they're good for your feet. They're not fashion sandals. They're kind of squat-looking sandals that hippies and people with foot trouble wear, and of course, Berkeley being full of people who are far too sensible to ruin their feet by walking around in high heels. There are a lot of folks who wear those sandals there.
So what did you find in the classroom?
Very, very bright people. I was really pleased. I had thought, like many people in our business, I've been sort of grumpy about young people coming into journalism recently, because it seems to me we've gotten an awful lot of ambitious little careerists, and I keep looking at them and thinking to myself, damn, why didn't they go into investment banking? But the students I found at Berkeley were not just bright, but idealistic to a remarkable degree.
What are they going to find once they get into the business?
Well, they're going to have some of it ground out of them. There's no question about that. But it's my hope that they'll stay with it long enough to make a difference.
Why will they have it ground out of them?
Well, part of it is an old tradition in the newspaper business, as is true in many others. There is a sort of tradition that, I call it the Marine Corps mentality. You know, listen, son, I ate chip when I was young, and you can do it too. It'll make a man out of you. It'll put hair on your chest. I mean, the idea that you should somehow, as part of making someone pay their dues, put them through a bad time. And I think it's a terrible mistake. One of the things we still do in the newspaper business is take bright, talented, idealistic young people and give them the world's worst, most boring assignments. We make them write obituaries or some boring thing. Why not take them and put them immediately on some big series where you could use all that energy and idealism? I I've always thought that was a mistake, the way we treat young people in our business, and it's true in a lot of fields.
You know, you, and whenever you appear on the network here, you use language that you want to use whenever you want to use it. And there is a column in here, as you know, in which you have a little gimmick. I'm not sure I can repeat it. Maybe you can. Where you list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 words.
Right.
And then you say, hold on, and then you go on to write sentences for each one of them.
Cock, prick, ass, breast. And all of which, of course, are legitimate words used in one context, and then in another context have connotations that are either vulgar language or
Let me give the audience an idea what you're talking about. Here's a sentence you use. This needle and prick all those balloons so we can take this needle and prick all those balloons so we can finish cleaning up. Then another one you have here, according to the Bible, Mary rode on an ass into Bethlehem. Another line, it was all those bases on balls that cost us the game. In other words, you take those words and put them in a sentence where people aren't offended.
Yeah, and it's funny, people will get upset at what they think is vulgar language, forgetting that words often have dual meanings. And the reason I made that point in the column is because I do think that context is everything. And this was in a column about criticism and indeed censorship of a television program from which snippets had been taken that made it look as though it were some, you know, very prurient, salacious program, when actually it was a very fine and intelligent program.
You used the word greed.
Greed?
Cynicism.
Yeah.
And you write a lot about lying. There's a column on April the 11th, 1955. We were wrong. This time he's right. You were talking about Robert McNamara. What got you interested in writing about Robert McNamara?
McNamara's book, in which he essentially apologized for Vietnam and admitted that it was a terrible mistake, had just come out. And what interested me was the reaction. There were an extraordinary number of people who sort of refused to accept McNamara's apology. And I am of the Vietnam generation. It was a war I oppose very strongly. It's one of the most horrible events in the entire history of this nation. Mistake is a word that barely covers that tragedy. But it seemed to me impossible not to accept and recognize McNamara's finally, painfully having come to the realization of not only having been wrong, but the terrible cost of having been that wrong.
What do you think of him?
Robert Strange McNamara, that middle name was always telling, I thought. I thought it was brave of him and right of him to have written that book, and that he deserves to be commended for it.
You write in that same column, then we cannot understand how we got from the end of Nam to where we are now. All this distrust and dislike that Americans now have for one another, all this cynicism.
I think that Vietnam was a terribly destructive episode. And it's interesting to me, as somebody who was young in the 60s, to hear now the constant references to the 60s as though sex, drugs, and rock and roll were the only things that happened. I was very, like many young people in the 60s, I was very political. And as far as I was concerned, the 60s were about first the Civil Rights Movement and then the anti-war movement. And I missed sex, drugs, and rock and roll entirely. Damn, what a fool. But it was a time I thought of great idealism, and then when the country got dragged into Vietnam, I think it dragged a lot of people into despair and cynicism and nihilism because it was just so stupid.
You say that you have lessons that have been learned from all this.
Yeah.
Don't lie.
Don't lie.
How much of that's going on today?
A lot.
Certitude is the enemy. What do you mean?
I think that if you are in a position of political leadership and you don't question yourself, you're apt to go very wrong. I think a becoming degree of self-doubt is one of the best qualities we can look for in leaders.
Yeah, you say self-doubt is good. Then you say particularly difficult lessons in a nervous age when the search for certainty compels so many.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people are looking for certainty. They are very, very uncomfortable with the idea that things are never going to be cut and dried, that there's never going to be a set of rules that always apply.
Down, yeah, I don't think we can see this. We'd have to get a real close-up here, but right down here at the very bottom it says here, when you know the little marks on the book that tell you where this belongs in a bookstore, it says current affairs / humor. If you had to pick one of those, which one would you pick first?
I'd pick humor, of course.
Why?
Well, I do think it's important, and I do try to write about politics in a way that makes people laugh. Now, there's two reasons for that. One is politics is intrinsically funny, and this should be noted and appreciated by all. And second, I think it's important in a time when people so look down on politics and are so reluctant to get involved or even learn very much about it. I constantly hear people say things like, politics, they're all crooks, who cares? Very dismissive. And it seems to me that in part that's because people who write and report about politics make it so boring. I mean, you read those newspaper articles that start, House Bill 327 was passed out of subcommittee by a unanimous vote on Tuesday. I mean, who wants to read any more than that? I've seen reporters time and again take all the juice and joy and life and comedy and drama and humanity and excitement out of politics. They just wring it all out, clomp. And what they leave you with is this dried set of lifeless fact that doesn't reflect at all the whole splendid panorama that is politics.
July 4th, 1995. You like to write July 4th columns, don't you?
Yeah, I like every time we have a birthday in this country, I sort of write a column celebrating us. I like to do that.
In 95, you said, I am a longtime fan of our national habit of polling ourselves to find out how dumb we are.
Isn't this wonderful? We do that all the time, always taking polls to find out how stupid we are, and then we sit there reading the polls going, oh my God, look at this. Oh, we're all so stupid. Isn't that wonderful? It's such a comic thing for people to do.
Well, why do we do it?
Because we're funny people.
Another line I underlined, this is far more interesting than living in Canada, where the national motto is, now let's not get excited.
I swear that's true. I've been up to Canada. That is their national motto. Now, let's not get excited. I was up there one time when they were having a national election that was practically a revolution. They threw out the party that was in power. They completely took off a party that had been there forever, practically disappeared. A whole new set of folk came in, and all the commentators were there on election night saying, now, let's not get excited. When they win the World Series, instead of cutting up and going wild and people downtown honking and dancing the way they would in America, the Canadians always go, this is quite wonderful, but let's not get excited.
Later in that column, you said, we're the country that put Elvis on a stamp. By the way, did you like Elvis Presley?
Well, of course.
We buy pink lemonade and striped toothpaste. Now, I didn't think one of our favorite people would get it into this book, but here he is. 67.2% of us believe that Alexis de Tocqueville never should have divorced Blake Carrington.
What a great nation. What a great nation.
Then you have one, see the next one in here on the 4th of July is July 3rd, 1997. And as we wish our country happy birthday, endeavor to recall two things. One, most Americans really are much nicer people than we often give ourselves credit for being. And two, the pursuit of happiness was an 18th century locution for the search for justice and right.
Yeah. I think those are both important things. One is that, and I think it's the fault of people in our business, Brian, the media presents such a negative picture. We're just so relentlessly negative. I don't think it's that the media are left-wing or right-wing, but they are negative. And that's partly the nature of the world. If you've ever noticed that the world news is always worse than the national news, and the national news is always worse than the state news, and the state news is always worse than the local news, and the local news is always worse than whatever has happened in your neighborhood that day. Well, of course, the world is pretty much like your neighborhood. The whole world is pretty much like your neighborhood. Not much horrible ever happens there. But the news business so focuses on the bizarre, the disastrous, and the unusual that people get the sense that the world out there is much more dangerous and dark than it actually is. The world's full of nice folks. And then my second point in that piece about the pursuit of happiness, people sometimes think that the pursuit of happiness is, you know, somehow it's written in the Constitution that we all have a right to go off on a great search for self-fulfillment and satisfaction and frisks and jollification. Actually, that's about looking for a way to find justice.
You say the nicest people in America are in Minnesota?
I believe that it to be absolutely true. Now, Minnesotans are a little tired of being called nice. Understandably so. They sort of wince. But the truth is, they're awfully nice in Minnesota.
But you wrote a column from the mall there.
The Mall of America. What a place. What a bit. Like the pyramids of ancient Egypt, like the Colosseum of ancient Rome. We have the Mall of America.
When did you go there?
It's been a couple of years now. What an amazing place. What a great temple to consumption that is.
What did you see?
Oh, there's a world of stuff at the Mall of America. You just hardly would not believe it. There's entire stores that sell nothing but barrettes and hair bows. There's stores that sell nothing but different kinds of popcorn. You would not believe the variety of stuff there is in this world.
Why are we such a consumer nation?
Well, now, there's a good question. It's partly because in the capitalist system, they push you to consume, and an enormous amount of time, money, and skill is spent persuading us to buy things like pink lemonade and striped toothpaste, which are not exactly basic necessities in this world. The amount of money spent on a single television ad is frequently, a 30-second ad frequently costs more than the entire 30-minute program surrounding the ad.
All the columns you've written over the years, doesn't have to be the most, you know, the one that got the most reaction, but what are the kind of columns that you hear from people by letter or email? I know you wrote here one where somebody appended a copy of a column, and I called you a commie fag lover. Was it?
Commie fag lover, yeah, I get a lot of those.
Why?
There are certain topics. I used to sort of say, well, there are certain topics that sort of rattle their cages. You're always going to hear from the haters. If you write about death penalty, abortion, trying to think of some others, there's a series of subjects that just always touch off the nutcases. And then I thought about it again, and I thought, gosh, it's practically everything I write touches them off. Oh, yeah, gays, homosexuals, that sets them off, too.
And there actually had a quote that you wrote where you said that, where is it? God, gays, and guns are always good for some excitement.
You bet. I tell you, you want to stir things up and get people screaming, you bring up God, gays, and guns in my state.
Now, you talk about conservatives in here on occasion, and you say mean as hell with hide-off conservatives.
Mean as hell with the hide off. Yeah, that's a certain kind of
What kind is that?
Just teeth-rattling mean. Meaner than a skillet full of rattlesnakes.
And how do you know they're mean?
We have them down in Texas because they'll do things that are gratuitously cruel in the name of conservatism, like, you know, cut milk for children or something that is just makes no sense fiscally.
Why do they do it?
Because they're mean.
Do you think they get up that way every day? They just...
There is... It's always hard for me to identify the... you know, I think this is true on the liberal side, too, but the legitimate, thoughtful, philosophical, consistent conservatism, and there are a lot of conservatives I admire, I really do.
Name one.
Both political. Jim Kilpatrick seems to me to be a very thoughtful conservative.
From?
The writer, James.
Oh,
Yeah.
James Jackson.
Yeah, yeah. I find him consistently thoughtful and a very principled person. And I understand that political point of view, but to me, we've been getting more and more people to the right of people that I always thought were very conservative, like Kilpatrick and Barry Goldwater. Now we've got people to the right of them who seem to think that government should be used in a punitive way against poor people. I mean, it's not just that they're opposed to welfare. It's like, let's really make sure these people never get a chance to get anywhere. It's just so mean-spirited. And I don't think most people are like that.
Which conservative makes your skin crawl the most? When you hear them, see them, talk to them, read them?
Jesse Helms sets me off pretty bad. I just find him a mean-spirited person.
You talk a lot about Texans in your book. Phil Graham?
Phil Graham, there's another one. There's something in addition to the mean-spiritedness, there's a kind of smarminess about Graham that I find distasteful. But then I don't like him, some people do.
Congressman Tom DeLay from
Oh, now we're talking about my favorite trio of bozos.
They are?
Tom DeLay, Dick Armey, and Bill Archer are these three powerful Republican congressmen from Texas. And I must say, of the three, DeLay is probably the only one who is actively stupid. The other two are really fairly bright. I just happen not to agree with them politically. But DeLay, sometimes you do have to question that man's sense.
Like what?
Oh, one of his ideas is that we should bring back DDT. He's one of those people who thinks that environmentalism is a nonsensical and pernicious thing. He wants to bring back DDT.
You always refer to him as the exterminator.
He used to be a bug exterminator in Sugar Land, Texas. That's what he did for a living. He exterminated bugs. And before he went into Congress.
Have you ever met him?
Oh, sure.
Does he know you don't care for him?
Oh, yeah, sure. He was in the Texas legislature for a while. He wasn't. I never thought he was that bad when he was in the legislature. He seemed like a sort of regular vanilla Republican, but it certainly has taken on some strange coloration in Washington.
You refer to Bill Clinton as maybe Chauncey Gardner. Who was Chauncey Gardner?
He's a figure in a film called Being There who is an opaque person into whom other people read whatever they want. In this figure, the Chauncey Gardner guy, conservatives think he's conservative, liberals think he's a liberal, people read into him whatever they want to see there, and there is a touch of that about Bill Clinton.
What do you read into him?
I think he's a politician, and I say that I may be one of the last people left in America who does not use that word as a pejorative.
Actually, let me quote what you say about him. You say he's the most skilled politician I've ever watched work.
I like to watch politicians work. Well, remember when I was talking earlier about the art of politics being able to find this little thin sliver that allows you to get something done? Well, it gets harder and harder to get anything done about anything because our politics have gotten to be so head-buddy and people just going against one another out of knee-jerk reaction rather than concentrate on fixing a problem. And Clinton is good. And by that I mean he can find a way to get things done. It's not necessarily the solution he'll finally get through, may not be the best way to fix the problem, may not be the most efficient or least costly, but it is the politically doable way. And that's a great skill. That's actually a great art.
Anything about him you don't like?
Sure. He's a politician. Like all politicians, he's a compromiser. And in my opinion, he compromises far too easily and far too often. He'll often give away 9/10 of the loaf just to get one slice. Seems to me he ought to hold out for at least half.
Now, for whatever reason, in the last 6 months, we happened to have interviewed Alice Rivlin and Donna Shalala on this network. And I know Donna Shalala had a book party for you here in this town. But in each case, they talk about the hiking that goes on, and then you're in that group.
There is a bunch of people, almost all of us women, but a couple of men go along too, and we have been, for many years now, taking outdoor wilderness adventure trips together. And it started back in 1980 when a bunch of us did a whitewater raft trip out in Idaho. And every year that group, it shifts. Some years some people can't go and other people come in. It's not exactly the same crowd every time, but a bunch of us who, I think when we started doing this, nobody was particularly important or any kind of a big cheese. We were 20 years ago, we were just young and funny and enjoyed one another. And we got to where we'd almost every summer, we'd go on a trek in the Himalayas or climb Machu Picchu or take a kayak trip in Alaska. We've done all kinds of wonderful things together, and we really do have an awfully good time.
What's the value of all that?
It is sheer fun. You might think that, you know, with, say, heavy hitters, members of the cabinet, and this kind of thing all along on a trip, that we would sit around having deep philosophical conversations or weighty policy discussions. We revert to being complete 13-year-olds on this trip. We just giggle and really silly.
Do people change when they get power?
That's a good question. They often do. Almost always they start taking themselves quite seriously.
How about your friends that you go hiking with? Anybody?
They're still teasable. They're still teasable.
You see a change?
Yeah, I do. Now, more in Donna than in Alice Rivlin. Alice Rivlin seems to me to be a wonderfully consistent human being. I think Donna is the same good person she always was, and she's trying to, I think everything that she tries to do is good. I mean, I think all the policies are good, and of course she is remarkably effective in government. But I see in Donna I guess it's just being used to dealing with people in your daily life who are household names in the rest of the country. Sometimes you get the impression that she's so used to dealing with big names and big people and important people that maybe she's not hanging out enough time with people of no particular distinction but great delight.
The back of your book, Jim Lehrer says, endorses the book by saying this book is not for everyone. What do you think he means by that? He goes on to say a lot of other things.
Well, he knows perfectly well that my opinions are sort of on the left side of the political spectrum. I consider myself a populist rather than a liberal, but I'm not worth quarreling over.
What's that mean?
A populist is somebody who sees politics more from an economic perspective than an ideological perspective. I often argue that I don't think politics is a spectrum that runs from right to left. It's a scale that runs from top to bottom. And I think the only real political questions are who's getting screwed and who's doing the screwing.
Paul Wellstone also gives you a nod in the back of the book. Molly Ivins insists on integrity and honesty in politics. Does that compromise you that he now has said nice things about you? You're afraid to ever want?
That does. I've often wondered. In fact, I'm glad my publisher called him and asked him for the blurb and that I didn't. I think it's bad policy for a journalist to owe a politician. I really do.
Jim Hightower's on here too.
Yeah,
thank you, Jesus, he says. Here comes Molly with another power-packed volume to cure what ails us. You friends?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Same kind of politics?
Oh, yeah. Jim is one of the great Texas populists. You know, the populism started in Texas. I mean, that's where the movement first came, out of that thin, stony soil in the central hill country of Texas. And for years, we had wonderful populist representatives, Wright Patman in Congress, and Sam Rayburn, Ralph Yarborough in the Senate. And the best Texas politicians were always at least part populist. But it's, I don't think we have anyone in public office anymore who really counts as a true populist.
One line in here where you say the oil companies bought Lyndon Johnson.
Sure they did. He carried water for the oil companies in the 1950s constantly. He was the senator from Texas Oil when he was in the Senate.
There's a story or a column in The Progressive about the Lord.
Oh, yes. The Lord impersonation problem. This has worried me considerably.
Now, can you go back and set the scene on why you wrote? And by the way, you write for The Nation, The Progressive, and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram in here.
Right. I'm very fond of writing for small progressive magazines that pay in the high two figures. This is the kind of fiscal sanity that has made me the woman of great wealth that I am today. I'm shrewd, I tell you.
What's the story about this cad claiming to be God, as you say?
This cad claiming to be God. What happened was a bunch of folks from Floydada, Texas.
Go back to that. What's the name of the town?
Floydada.
Floydada?
Floydada, Texas. It's up in the Panhandle. It's a particularly undistinguished town. And a whole bunch of them believed that the Lord had told them to get naked, get in the car, and drive to Louisiana. And they get as far as Vinton, Louisiana, and their car hits a tree, and to the absolute astonishment of the people who saw it happen, out of this car come about 20 naked people, including a bunch of kids who were stuck in the back.
20?
20, so I think it was more than 20. I can't remember the exact number. But there was just quite a few of them squashed all in there together. And they explained, as they were standing there on the street in Vinton, Louisiana, with their car driven into the tree, that the Lord had told them to do this, which, of course, increased the astonishment of the police of Vinton, Louisiana, even more. And so I'm addressing this phenomenon by saying, you know, I do not believe it was the Lord who told them to do that. There is this fellow who runs around impersonating the Lord. And many a time people will tell you, God told me to do this. But it's that fellow who impersonates the Lord. It's not the Lord at all. It's a real problem.
Now, you say that today's politicians are blow-dried, priggish, goody-two-shoes suburban bores.
I find that all too often, especially those guys. Have you noticed how often people who used to be television weathermen now run for public office? They all have really good hair and no brains. Now, I don't mean to put down weathermen as a class, but I'm sure there are redeeming exceptions among the weathermen of the nation. But I just am speaking of a common kind of weatherman. I find more and more that people who go into politics seem to me to somehow they don't have much depth, they don't have much fire, Lord only knows what makes them run.
You say I am the world's leading authority on blue-bellied, wall-eyed, lithium-deprived Texas lunatics.
There was a remarkable week in my life when a bunch of Texas lunatics holed up out by Fort Davis, Texas, and demanded that Texas be allowed to secede from the rest of the country. And it touched off quite a media storm around the world, and as the resident authority on Texas lunatics, there I was getting telephone calls from places like Bombay. Miss Ivins, is Bombay Times calling? Can you explain, please, the people in the Fort Davis? And I would, yeah, I can explain them. They're just crazier than shithouse rats.
On that note, we're going to call this quits. Molly Ivins is our guest. Here's the book. You got to dance with them what brung ya. Politics in the Clinton years. Thank you very much.